Hi, welcome back everyone to Souls Wide Open. This is our fifth episode. It is going to be we had originally planned on talking about relational fragility, but we decided today that we want to talk about emotions. So the whole point of this podcast is about pursuing our soul's desires with as much love and truth as we can muster up. And today we just decided that our soul's desire was to really talk about emotions. So to kick us off, I'm going to invite Chelan to read one of her poems that she said is a true whopper and right on the spot for this topic. So would love to hear it.
Thanks, Justin. Hey, everybody. So this is from my book, Let Us Dance, The Stumble and Whirl with the Beloved. And this poem's all about big crying. Okay, it's called Cleaning Your Heart. There's crying, and then there's crying with a capital C. Crying with a capital C is the act of the true warrior, that deep grief that cleanses the heart, that wrings out the ancestral line of its ancient pain, that reaches back to the beginnings of every oppression you've ever known, which shares a chord with all oppression, and finally kisses even that wound with light. Crying allows you to dive into and beyond the dark that has held back countless generations from their gifts and desires and truths. Crying undoes the sickness of secrets. Crying no longer compromises truth for comfort. This crying is the evolution of the soul. It is the alchemy of the straw of the old world to the gold of the new. It is the undoing of the body from being cinched to the past. It unties the corset of worn out contracts your soul never wanted to live in. Crying resuscitates your breathless life. It is the embodied refusal to go on serving what no longer serves you. Crying is light, taking the shadow's hand and courageously walking into the great unknown, trusting there's wholeness on the other side. It is releasing once precious handholds. It is foregoing control. It is the time of the end and the time of the beginning. It dives you deep into new frontiers that you may grab a new handful of power. It is surrendering deeply enough all the structures you thought you knew to rehome your soul in a more suitable habitation. Crying moves inner mountains and slays illusion. From the inside out, crying undoes and remakes the world.
Oh my gosh.
Thank you.
I mean, there's so much of that poem that really resonated, but like even just what you were saying about how it's like this ancestral, like, gosh, there's so much, as you said, oppression associated with the suppression of like a choice to suppress emotions. And then from that, like the loss of the gifts that you have.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
wow. Yeah. It's so on point.
You.
So on point.
Right? Yeah.
Okay, so the reason Chelan and I wanted to talk about this today is because it's just been like, well, we always like get on and do a little personal catch up, and we were like, oh my gosh, okay, we just need to talk about this today because it's so profound in both of our lives right now. Well, always is, but like maybe more so at this moment. And it's just, yeah, we both are such strong believers in emotional work because of what we've literally seen transpire in our own lives. So, do you have an idea of like a personal story you want to share real quick, Chelan? Do you have like one that you want to go for?
Sure.
Okay, cool.
Well, I was just going to start by just talking briefly about my life before I started doing this emotional processing and after. And yeah, and so when I was 21, I had a really, really amazing, deeply profound healing experience, which was really like an experience of consciousness, of realizing that that I wasn't basically my pain. I was more than that. Like my essence was not that. Like I stopped identifying to such a degree with the pain that I had. And before that, when I identified as like being my pain and being my struggles, even though it was so miserable, I couldn't move it through me because I thought it was me. I was confused. And so that was too scary to let go of these big feelings. So I thought I, needed to change them or somehow, I don't know, work around them or avoid that but I couldn't let go of it because it felt like death almost. Like if those feelings were me, to release them would be like almost like death. So does that make sense?
It actually completely does. I can resonate with that a lot.
Oh,
yeah.
Cool. Yeah. And so then in this healing experience, like profound experience of realizing, oh, no, I'm not my pain, but it's mine to steward and take care of.
Yes.
It's not like, I think we often think about healing in this way that's not really true, of like either you have pain and you're not healed, or you don't have pain and you are healed. This like binary that has to do with like overcoming and whatever. And for me, it's certainly not that I don't have pain anymore. I have just as much pain as ever in some ways, but there's a beautiful generative process of moving that pain through me through deep cathartic releases. And then, so then I get to receive the gifts of that pain, which is just self-insight, self-understanding, compassion, wisdom, letting go of fear, and so much more. So yeah, it's not that I don't have pain. It's just that now that energy of stuck pain, it's just not so stuck. I can take care of it. And it's changed my life dramatically, that process.
No, actually what you're saying really resonates a lot, because I remember, and it's really fascinating. This actually happened I had COVID in like August of last year, so over 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And I mean, those of you that had COVID kind of in a terrible way, I mean, mine wasn't, I should be careful how terrible I make it sound. It wasn't that bad, but it was pretty bad. I didn't have to go to the hospital, but it was pretty bad. And at the end of it, I was so drained, but I was like emotionally feeling so much heaviness. And a switch actually happened to me because I was in so much agony that I was kind of like finally letting go. And the switch is what you're kind of talking about, which is I finally was like, oh, I'm not doomed. Like every time I would get into like the really heavy emotions, I felt so doomed. I felt like almost helpless. Like I couldn't, like I associated the pain with like always being there and it being so heavy that I could never move through it. And then this switch happened where I was like, whoa, actually, I just have to, as you say, take more responsibility and allow this stuff to move through me, but it doesn't define me. It's just this wound I have that now as an adult with the capacity to deal with it, I that's my responsibility, and I'm just going to have to move through it. And with that, have a lot of faith that that's even possible. I think that was part of it, right? It was like letting go of like this is never going to change, and having faith that, oh wait, actually this can change. So I think I resonate with that moment, actually.
Totally. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. And then since that, I'll share my I told Chelan this story like moments ago because it's just so good, and it really highlights how both of us have experienced emotional processing in some ways, and like these moments of huge release and acknowledgement and taking self-responsibility for what we're feeling, and then also having a huge transformation like seem to follow right afterwards.
Yes.
I, as some of you know, live on a farm, and it's my family's farm, and there's just kind of been this loss of direction. And I'm the only one that lives here full time right now. So, and it really is my dream to be here and see this place come to life. So there's been this like loss of like, what do we do? And my dad was saying, man, we really need some direction here. And I was like, yeah, we do. And I was like, gosh, it's too bad there isn't a person here that could do that. And I was like, wait a minute, hold on, wait, why aren't I that person? Man, it felt so overwhelming that it was like, it sounded so nice to have someone come in and be like, do this, do this, do this. And then I just had this really big cry about like not having the person to help me do that, and just like, what did I sign up for? You know, am I just going to be doing this with my dad forever? Like, love him, but also not really my dream. And then also just this kind of like overwhelm of this beautiful property that also it can, there's so much capacity for it to do things, but I also just feel like, how can I possibly, as me, little old me, figure this out? And there's just, so I had this huge cry like 2 nights ago, humongous cry, just like the deepest pains of, where's my life going? What have I signed up for? This place is, you know, not going anywhere. Lots of grief, lots of fear. And then I went to sleep, slowly was able to fall asleep. And as things do when we sleep, I had like an amazing kind of awareness come to me. And I woke up the next morning just going, oh yeah, that's my dream. And a year ago when I moved in here, I really, really focused on Angora goats, which I'm vegan, so I don't eat animal products. I don't want to see animals being killed, but I love the concept of animal husbandry. So the idea of doing Angora goats, which are the mohair goats, so you get fiber from them, was really interesting to me last year. I did tons of research, and then like everything just happened, and we were like in this place on this land, and I kind of forgot about it. But I woke up that next morning just like, oh, I'm going to become an Angora goat farmer. And then
Yes.
I woke up, told my dad, and he was like, okay, cool. He was visiting. So he was like, great, sounds good. And he was like, oh yeah, you've talked about that a lot. Like, I think that's a great idea. And then I went and helped my friends with a plant sale, and she's a farmer down the street. And so I told her, I'm going to become an Angora goat farmer. And she goes, great. I know someone that maybe can help with some grants. And I was like, great. And then we go help at her plant sale, and like an hour in, I hear her like talking to some woman, and the woman is like, oh yeah, I raise goats. And the woman's like, oh, go talk to Justin. She wants to know about goats or sheep, or what are you doing, Justin? And I go, yeah, goats. And the woman says, what kind? And I say, well, Angora goats. And she goes, oh yeah, I raised like hundreds of those for 20 years. Like the expert falls into my hands literally the day I decide to do this. And this is what, and Chelan and I were both like, yep. And it's because of that cry I had, releasing all of this fear and releasing all of this grief, that the universe was able to help me align to now moving forward, which is like so trippy, but it happens all of the time. Like the second you finally have this big release, it's like you're no longer blocking yourself. There's no longer these fears or these things you don't want to feel. Like the emotions are now you're feeling them, so you're not avoiding them. So now all of a sudden you're opening yourself up to the ability to like see what else is out there, because you're not afraid of what the feelings might be. Right?
Yes.
How else would you describe that?
Thank you so much. Well, I'm always wanting to describe these sort of like mysterious phenomena with some kind of like connect them with almost like an undiscovered scientific process that just like the law, like,
yes,
like sort of like laws of like how things work. And I don't know, this is the best I can do so far, but like one thing we're going to talk about is how a lot of most of our pains and blocks and fears trace back to childhood. And like, we have these wounds in childhood, and then we sort of we're so wise and smart, we need to get by with, in an environment that no family is perfect. And so we like have these strategies that we create to like take care of our feelings that we don't really have tools to take care of, by sort of creating walls around our wounds and our hearts so they don't get reactivated. And then we have all these ways of operating to avoid our pain so we can get by, not having tools as kids. And so then like, it almost creates like a whole paradigm, I think, of way that we relate to the world when we become adults, if we haven't taken care of this stuff yet. It's like this whole, many adults live in like our lives are just sort of strategic ways of avoiding our pain.
Completely.
and
Yeah.
and then we have like these thoughts about ourselves, and like we have usually like some kind of limitation on what's possible, because everything is filtered through this way of like keeping ourselves kind of small to avoid feeling our
Yeah.
pain. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Absolutely.
Anyway, so then when we are finally able to like go into that root and heal that, like it releases so much energy. It heals that original wound, and then it heals like all this energy that's been going into these protective strategies and all of this performance of way we're pretending to be while working around our pain. It's like, oh my God, there's so much to it. It opens up so much. And then that energy that was just locked into this pattern of self-avoidance can just be used for creative things, and yeah, and can go into like supporting the things that we've always wanted, which were just sort of locked in there too, along with our,
Yeah.
I don't know, I just said a lot.
No, okay, and this is great. No, I have two things that
Yeah.
you said that I really want to highlight because they're so spot on.
Cool.
The
Please.
first is like this being mediocre to stay comfortable. Like we as an adult, we've learned to just stay in this kind of middle place where we don't have too many emotions, right? So like as you're saying, like we don't have tons of high emotions. Like if you think about a child, oh my gosh, they have like the ultimate happiest moments of all, like it's insane, the joy, but also the deepest woes, like, oh,
yeah,
some real heavy stuff. And so as adults, we've found this way to be like mediocre in our emotions. But then what happens is we're also mediocre in our capacity to do things because we're so afraid of going into those extremes. So like, yeah, so that's what I've really found is like, it's scary to go do big things because of the potential of the emotion that might be there. Like if I wasn't willing to go feel all of the grief and fear I had about being like a solo person doing this farming stuff, I would just stay mediocre and never be willing to go pursue that because it's horrifying. Like I have so much, as we're going to talk about next, like beliefs that have been kind of installed in me from childhood about being just a female, like a single female doing this kind of stuff. And then not only is it just like me, but there's just like this long line of women and men that had beliefs that that's not really possible, or like, or kind of shameful even, like, oh gosh, it sounds terrible being a single woman without family, like how poor you, you know? So there's like all these beliefs that are, I have to like grieve through, or the fear of, oh my God, is that really a terrible life I don't want to live? But if I'm willing to experience some of that fear ahead of time, I'm not afraid of going into all of that emotion and getting out of that place.
Totally. Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
Yes. And then I think another piece that comes up for me a lot is like, in terms of moving out into more, you know, of the light, or really moving toward what I want and claiming it, is just like major fear of being seen and not being, you know, because when we move out of that narrow margin of, you know, the mediocre or the status quo, or these patterns that we've been taught to operate in that yeah, do keep us like pretty small a lot of the time, then when we move out of that, usually we're seen because we're doing something a little bit like culturally abnormal. And oh my God, and then I just have so much grief around the ways that I wasn't seen in my strength and beauty and light and potential, and then ways that I was seen that were really painful too, like, you know, that saw me in ways that didn't uphold, you know, the way that I wanted to be seen, that weren't supportive or encouraging. And so, oh God, there's so much fear and pain. And then in this process for me that you've, you know, supported me with and witnessed so closely, Justin, of like moving forward and publishing these books, it's been a huge process of being seen. And like, as I have, with each step, there's like a new layer of grief around that. And and each time I've grieved through, then it's like, it's just, it affirms that the inner and the outer are just so intimately connected somehow. And as I release these small, like you said, beliefs about myself and these emotions that have kept me small and stuck, then things just continue to open as I let go of fear of that process. Anyway.
Yeah. And I think, just for me to be more clear, I think that some of the emotions I released that the other night was like really the fear of doing this alone. Like I could feel it was really a very fear experience, and like letting, and when I say a big cry, like there are different flavors when we're feeling different emotions. So I do feel like I'll be crying, but I can like literally feel myself shaking and like my teeth chattering. And I know that there's like fear associated with that too. And like I have a hard time breathing. And so I'll go into like that, and really, I'm like, oh my gosh, there's a lot of fear here. And so I think feeling the fear of doing this alone, I cracked something open and allowing myself to go through that really scary feeling that allowed me to then even be like, oh my gosh, I can be a goat farmer all by myself. Like I can start pursuing this, and maybe I won't be by myself. Like that's not a guarantee at this point. But I think I was too afraid to consider that concept. So it was like back burner, back burner. But then by allowing myself to like go through this blockage that I had emotionally, I was like, oh, wait a minute. No, I can do this. Like, it's okay. So there's a couple things I want to talk about, Shane. I want to make sure we talk about, first off, like why emotions are like kind of maybe a little confusing, because we're such intellectual adults that we've suppressed emotions that it's like a little hard. And then also what it means to like start owning your emotions. Not just surface layer ones, but the deep ones. So back to like emotions being a hard thing to talk about, because I think this is a concept that like we could sit here and talk about this all we want, but emotions aren't conceptually understandable. They're energy in motion. Emotions are energy in motion. So like when you try and just describe love to someone, like we all have experienced love, so we feel it. But how do you really with words describe love? Like you can't. You just can't. But we all have a deep emotional understanding of it. So that's why it makes sense when we use the word. We can actually feel, oh yeah, I know what love feels like. And so I think the same thing can happen when we're like, yeah, emotional processing. And it's like, well, there's this element of having gone through the emotionally feeling and releasing that we could sit and talk about it. But people that haven't done it, they're like, I don't get it. Because the truth is it's not a conceptual thing that you will, like, I don't know how much I could talk about it without someone then going and experiencing it and being like, oh, I understand the emotional process now.
Yeah. Because it's like a wisdom experience rather than a knowledge experience. Or it's just experiential, like you said, not conceptual. Totally.
Right. Falling in love is totally a feeling. It's not something you can emotion or thought. It's not thought based.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. And then, okay, so then let's talk about this other thing, because I think this is something you and I have cracked, which is really important for people, which is the difference between feeling like a surface or effect emotion versus going into the deeper emotions. Because when you go into the deeper, more causal or root emotion, that's where the big transformation happens.
100%. Yeah. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I'll get started. So, an effect emotion for me is like the thing that's happening in the moment. So for example, I don't know, like getting getting embarrassed by something that I did. Okay. Like I could be really embarrassed by something, or let's say someone says something that really like hurts my feelings, right? Like I get my feelings hurt. So there's this moment of like crying about being embarrassed or ashamed of who I am. And the thing is you can have a big cry about that. And you can actually cry about that for many, 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 many days or years even. Like you could stay in that emotion about, oh my gosh, I'm embarrassed by how I look or something like that. But what I'm finding is that that's a surface layer emotion. There's actually going to be a deeper emotion to that. and deeper layer to that, and maybe even deeper layer to that. There's all these deeper layers that those are the transformational layers that when are felt, we get so much movement. So like the top layer of like, I'm embarrassed about how I look could be like, well, I feel unlovable. And when you think about unlovable, oh my gosh, there's a lot of grief there. And if I'm unlovable, like I'm going to be alone forever. And if I'm alone forever, I'm going to have this terrible, sad life. Like there's all of these deeper layers where like being embarrassed at a birthday party is one thing, but like being alone forever and unlovable is like, whoa, that's the real childhood deep grief. And when you go feel that, that's where the transformation happens.
Oh my God. Wow. That's so interesting. Yes, that for sure. Somebody said something interesting to me the other day too, about how like you said, alone forever, like how kids really do think in those ultimate terms.
Yes.
So like, you know, if something happens to them, it's like, it can be, yeah, I'm going to be alone forever, or yeah, I'm going to feel sad, or whatever it is, unlovable forever, or whatever. And so like, okay, this is important, that like, there's so much rejection, I think, as adults of feeling those emotions that stem from childhood, because then we judge ourselves and think we're childish. Like if we still have feelings from childhood that are based in that kind of way of perceiving the world, of like, forever I'm going to be lonely. And so then that judgment of ourselves, it can be so limiting, because then we can't get to that place, we can't tend to those parts of ourselves. And these wounds that happen in childhood, it's like it's a piece of our child self, and as we avoid them, it's almost like we're just neglecting that part of our inner child. And so that pain gets more and more, just like a neglected child would act out more and more. You know, the longer it doesn't get love and attention, so too do those wounds just get fiercer and fiercer, and they're acting out because they deeply want our love and attention. It's so interesting and cool. And so, but we have to give ourselves permission. Well, first we have to know that it's completely universal for every adult to have tons of wounds from childhood that still feel very like childish in that way. Like that we need to basically have tantrums.
Yes.
And be so sad about wanting our mommy, you know, and like have genuine deep grief around that. And like, so that's normal. And then I don't remember where I was going. Can you help me?
Tantrums.
Yeah. Well, so it's just basically, it's normal, and it doesn't make us like not a good adult to have this. What makes us actually mature is when we can take the beautiful, loving responsibility to be with those parts of our child self and take care of them. So then they stop acting out on our lives because they feel loved and they feel seen. And so then that joy that was connected with ourself in those years, is restored to us, that our creativity, our imagination, and it becomes this harmonious, almost like integration of our mature, wise self with this beautiful, free, clear, creative, loving energy that we had as a child.
Oh my gosh, this is so good. Okay, I want to use exactly what you just said and kind of like bring it back here for a second. So what you're talking about is those childhood wounds that get really locked up, because when we're kids, we're really told not to feel those things, both in
either
just like
explicitly or implicitly. Yeah.
Bingo. In so many ways, we're told not to feel those wounds. And so if you think about it, at some point in my childhood, I was very afraid of being alone forever. Okay, like that. And then we can imagine a lot of kids.
I still am afraid of being alone forever.
Same. 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 Yeah. So at some point, very afraid of being alone, told to not feel that, which was shamed or like disciplined, or like basically like stop crying, even just stop crying, right, is going to tell me to shut that down. But then I have this like really big fear and even belief that maybe I'm unlovable enough to be loved forever and with someone. And I call that like a part of your belief library. And then it becomes a limiting belief, as a lot of people say, right? So it becomes an
The belief
error-based
library.
belief. So then
Yes.
when I'm 34 years old trying to start a goat farm, I'm so afraid of being alone and not being lovable that I'm afraid to step out on my own without like a partner or without some big safety net. So it is so important that we go back and heal, which is an emotional process, these deep wounds that are, like I said, emotionally based. This can't just be done intellectually. As adults, we want it to be done intellectually because we've been shamed out of our emotional experiences. But it is such an emotional process because it was incepted into us when we were these young emotional beings. Like, it happened when we were emotional. We weren't just a logical adult. Yeah, if we have a belief that comes up logically as an adult, we can usually like flip it around just by a logical thought change. But when it was an early childhood emotional wound created, there's so much emotion there that we have to be willing to go back and release that emotion.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's so much shame around emotions in our culture.
Yeah.
Incredible amounts.
Yeah.
I mean, just as did I cut you off? Were you gonna
no, great.
Oh, okay. No, I just as you're talking, I'm just like, well, part of me is exploring in my own mind, like, how did we get to this point culturally where this whole deep and profound and beautiful and powerful part of our human experience has been so exiled, so like demonized, almost like so harshly shamed. And even though the effects of living in a way where we repress this huge part of our life experience, even though like that creates addiction, that creates incredible loneliness and disempowerment and fragility and like insane amounts of suffering, like we've bought into that as a culture. Isn't that wild?
It is
Do you have
wild.
any thoughts about that? I'm curious if you have any thoughts about like why we do that in the first place. Like, why the F do we repress our emotions? Who had that idea? Well, like, actually, okay, you go. And then actually, I just sort of had a thought, but you go first.
No, you go. Why?
Oh, well, that's so funny. Like, as I was asking that question, I was answering it. Yeah. Well, I was just, and I don't know if this is an answer. This is just a hypothesis, but that like, you know, in times when we didn't have, you know, a store to go to down the street to get our food really easily, and we didn't have a hospital down the road to like go take care of, like where it was way harder to meet our basic needs, essentially. I wonder if like, I don't know, there was just, it felt like to do emotional processing, if there was this idea that would take up too much time or valuable, you know, when we needed to be planting the crops or, you know, doing all those things, or else we would die. Like if that just felt like focusing more on the doing was more important. What do you think?
Oh my gosh, you know, it's actually really a fascinating question because I think there's so many things here. I think part of it that comes up is just that we have this gift of free will. So we've been given the opportunity to choose how we live our lives, whether we are emotional beings or we decide to shut down our emotions and become just logical, more thought-based beings. Yeah. And I think a lot of it has to do with kind of what you're saying, that we found that if we kind of bring ourselves to that middle place, so stop feeling the high emotions, stop feeling the low emotions, we can kind of be in, like I said, that mediocre middle that feels just more comfortable all around. So we might not get the ecstasy of really high joyful emotions, but when you start detuning yourself from your emotional truth, you take away the emotional highs and the emotional lows, because you can't have one without the emotion, without the other. Truth is one package. So when you bring everything into that mediocre middle, it starts to feel a little more comfortable and controllable. And I think as humans that, yeah, at times did have like maybe a really difficult life, didn't have faith in the universe's love, in God's love, in safety, and like there's so many things. And then also, if as children we weren't taught this, and perpetually there's more and more just lessons being learned each generation of like don't feel, don't feel,
Yeah.
don't feel, I think it just kind of perpetually gets worse. And then you're right. What's cool is that now you and I, and a lot of people that we know, are in situations where like we're safe enough that we can start diving into these emotions, right? Like I do believe that there is this now capacity in a lot of humankind at the moment to be able to start dealing with these wounds because we aren't in as much pain or struggle. And don't get me wrong, I know a lot of the world still is, but I do think that there's this element of like, oh, I can work through some of this really scary stuff because logically I can actually see that I'm quite safe. So like, why do I have this deep fear of being unsafe when like for the most part I'm actually doing okay, you know?
Yes. Oh, so it's so interesting.
So interesting.
Yeah. Gosh. And something I also just want to say, this it's sort of it's all connected to the whole, not directly to this piece that we were just talking about, but like, while we think about big crying, I think often as childish, or while it's judged that way.
Yeah.
I think that like it's just that children do it because they're unblocked, but it's not actually childish, it's just human. And then as we grow up, we get blocked, but it's not. And so we associate that with childhood because that was the only time a lot of people did it, because they were unblocked.
Yes.
But it's really freaking healthy. And and it's just this amazing inbuilt system to open our hearts again, to process all this. Oh, we take in so much energy, we take in so much information. It's this incredible process of like releasing what we don't need. It's like pooping on an emotional level. I don't know, that's gross. I don't know, that's not a good metaphor. But it's like, sorry. It's like, it's this clearing out, it's metabolizing. It's like, it's because it's actually way more profound than that. But and it like moves us forward into new understandings. But I don't know, I just really want to say that it's this incredible, inbuilt, natural, healthy, great human process that it's just, and it's not childish.
Wait, why isn't it like pooping? You just described it perfectly, I think, where it is this like, we bring in stuff, we digest it, we feel it, we understand it, and then we release it in like a normal,
so maybe it
way.
is. You're right. Oh my God. And like, if we didn't poop, like we would be in bad shape. And like
blocked. We would be blocked.
We would be so blocked, and everything would be uncomfortable. We wouldn't enjoy food anymore. We wouldn't like want to move around very much. We would just be, and then we'd be grumpy. All these extra layers. We'd get sick.
Trying to just stay comfortable, which is exactly what we do when we don't want to feel emotions, is we avoid everything that would make us uncomfortable.
There you go. Okay. Yeah.
Nailed it.
So, and it's just it's so simple, right? To just be able, but then, actually, I have something else to say. So what happens when we avoid our emotions, like those core causal emotions, like you were talking about, then we act out in a way that is often, unhealthy in some way. And then it's really easy then to judge ourselves for those behaviors. Like, for example, if I'm not taking care of my sadness, I might be, grumpy or agitated or angry at my family and act, in an immature way like that. Just that's one example of many. But then if I get stuck in judgment about that, then I never can get through, because this is so interesting, that the only way to get into those deeper levels is through compassion, understanding, acceptance, and love. And so we actually have to start by accepting and understanding and having compassion and love for these behaviors that are sometimes ridiculous.
Yeah.
And totally. Trust that they come from an innocent root. Otherwise, like, our consciousness gets blocked from going into these deep places.
Yeah. So and I notice a difference between when I'm feeling my, as I said, affect emotions, like the emotion that's like based in whatever thing's happening right now. Like it's painful. But then when I go a little deeper and I'm kind of willing and curious about where is this stemming from?
Mm,
Like I'll be crying about
yes.
maybe someone not being there to help me with something, or I'll be like angry that I like didn't get assistance from someone on something, and I'll feel
Yes.
that as the effect. But then I'll go into the like deep sadness from what would I would, which would be childhood of someone not being there to support me. And like talk about
Yeah.
think of a 3-year-old crying about that and how it's just genuinely so lonely and genuinely so
Yeah.
scary and genuinely so sad. And I feel such a different type of emotion when I'm there. I actually, and I don't know if this necessarily has always been the case, but I'm now at the point where I start to feel that and I don't shame it. I'm like, oh yeah, this is real. Like this is the real
Yeah.
sadness. And I can't deny it. Like I'm connecting to it so deeply, and I can feel 3-year-old Justin like really sad about that. And yeah, so there's kind of like that switch from the like irritated, agitated adult that like wants her way and doesn't want to feel that emotion. And then like, okay, I'm feeling it a little bit. Okay, oh, here's that deepness. Here's that
Yes.
true agony. And back to your point really quick, I want to talk about like the childhood thing about how we've taken emotions and made them not human, which I guess I get it in some ways, because when we're little and babies, we are nothing but or I've talked about this before, I'll say it again. We are this orb of energy, which is emotions, or energy in motion, which is emotions. We are just nothing but this energetic being. We're nothing but emotions. We don't have the logical capacities that we will develop. So
Mm-hmm.
we think that children should transition out of that and become these logical beings. But the truth is that our very first condition in life was just emotional. So
Yeah.
that's the first thing we know. And why wouldn't that be an important tool to have with us our entire lives? But we expect for humans to not continue being that way.
Yes. That's so interesting. And what I've witnessed, it's been really interesting witnessing. I have a 5-year-old and a 1-year-old, and like witnessing their emotional process is like, because, right, what happens is as our prefrontal cortex, our executive function develops, like we do get more like choice and control, and we can be more intentional rather than totally automatic. But you're right. So what we mistakenly do is think that because we develop that, that means we use that beautiful capacity of executive function and intentionality and choice to squelch our feelings. But really, like what I think that's about is just being more responsible. So like while my 1-year-old and my 5-year-old are very emotional, often they'll hit each other when they're emotional, or they'll, rage at someone because that's easier or whatever. And so like what we can do with these executive functions isn't totally shut ourselves down emotionally, but use that to take this gorgeous responsibility and have the impulse control to not like attack someone. Like have that help our behaviors and our projection, and be wise and loving with our emotions. I think that's one of the like huge gifts of executive function. And unfortunately we like give that all this power, like power over in this like controlling way, rather than like this beautiful stewarding loving power to support ourselves emotionally.
Well, and it's so funny that you describe it like that, because I actually see a lot of adults doing still what your 5-year-old is doing. So like
Yeah, totally.
they're not
Makes
actually
sense.
taking responsibility for their emotions and
Yes.
feeling them, because that's a big thing that, gosh, we could talk about emotional responsibility for like a whole nother hour, I think. But
Yeah.
emotional responsibility as an adult, you have that executive function, you have that capacity to understand
Mhm.
yourself in the
Yeah.
world enough that you should be able to go in your own private way, deal with the emotions that are coming up so that you aren't lashing out, so that you avoid them, right? We talked about this in the anger one a bit, about how like Our anger is to get the world to do things so that we don't have to feel our emotions. But we now are responsible enough as an adult to go deal with our emotions. But most of us are walking around not wanting to feel our emotions. So we act like assholes, honestly. And we're doing all these things that looks like a 5-year-old hitting another person. It's just we have a more sly way of doing it so that it's like more justified. But the reality is that we aren't 5-year-olds anymore. We have this amazing capacity to understand what love is. And so we need to take responsibility for our emotions, which takes actually genuinely feeling them and not blaming. Absolutely. And also, I know this is something that I'll talk about more in the future. We will. But like, granted, a lot of this happened in our childhood. And that's there. And the truth of that's very important. But we don't need to continue blaming those people that assisted in the wounds, be it our parents or whatever 100%. Adults were around. So like now as adults, we need to take responsibility and go feel our emotions completely.
Totally.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay. I have 2 more things to say, and then I feel like we should wind up pretty
soon. I know. I think we've given them enough.
Can I say 2 more things?
Oh, but please, really? Of course. Of course.
Oh God. Sorry, everyone, if this is overkill. Well, I want to say like the amount of shaming around, like culturally speaking, around emotion, like taking care of our emotions. It's so interesting because like it can really feel like if we do that, if we really are, responsible in taking care of our feelings, that we won't belong in our families, in our community, in our culture, because it's super counterculture to be responsible, like on a deep level. And so, and take care of our pain so we don't like give it to others and hurt others with it. And so I just want to acknowledge how hard it actually can be to be responsible when there's a threat of not belonging, because in our minds, belonging is a survival thing. Because like, in our deep minds, if we don't belong in the tribe or whatever, if we're cast out, like we dead. And so, it can be really scary on the level of fear of losing belonging to actually take care of our stuff so we can be healthy citizens and do the work that would actually lead to true belonging. Oh my God. Yeah. So that was one thing. And then just hearkening back to what you were saying about how we don't let ourselves feel the highs or the lows and we stay in this mediocre zone. But like, we can't actually repress those highs and lows. They just act out in really irresponsible ways. So like we might get the highs through, doing some kind of drug that gets us those highs, or from like, like using porn, or like whatever kind of thing we do to get our highs met. Or like then our lows might come from just being really neglectful of our families and like zoning out and like, I don't know. But the point is that emotions can't actually, they always express themselves somehow, and they can be taken care of and express themselves beautifully and healthily, or they're just going to express without, the help of a wise adult and kind of act themselves out. So
you'll get constipated, and it will be very uncomfortable.
And you're gonna like poop your pants.
Possibly.
It's gonna be a hard experience.
Okay, wait, and I have like one funny little story. I have worked on feeling my emotions in a more like not public way, like that sounds a little silly, but like with less shame about being the adult that feels. And the like week I was moving off of Maui, I lived in this neighborhood where I was surrounded by like friends. Like I had multiple houses of friends. We all had this little great group on the street. And one day, like maybe a day or two before I was leaving Maui, when I was feeling a ton of grief about moving, because it was a very like emotional thing, I got a text from my neighbor who lived across the street, and she goes, "I hear you crying. Way to normalize wailing on a Friday afternoon."
I hear you crying. LOL.
I was like, oh my gosh, my neighbors can hear me.
Oh my God. Whoa. That is so interesting. And so many people have heard me cry too.
Yeah.
And I want to say that like, it's so sad how I'm positive in some cases. People who've heard me have assumed that that's a sign of maybe mental health issues rather than a seriously pro-health, hell yeah, Chelan thing. I know there's like she must be unstable kind of response. And that is so, that's really too bad.
It really is. And I'm like, that neighbor knows me well enough. Like she was a dear friend. So she understood that like Justin's fine. She's just going through what she's going through. But you're right. Like, I'm sure the neighbors I don't know as well are like, good Lord. Yeah.
Oh my God. Yes. Well, maybe this is a part 2 episode because we clearly have so much to share. And
yeah.
I hope this was valuable to all the listeners. And again, as always, like, well, we're going to have a Zoom gathering. We're still trying to pinpoint that where
and
we can all get together.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to tell the date once we figure it out before this gets put on. So in like 2 seconds, you'll hear a record. I'm going to share the date, but we just don't know as we're recording this right now. So we'll announce it right now.
And Justin, just to finish up, you said a line that was so powerful. You just said it mixed in with other things, but adults feel. And I love that line. And I think that's so true. That like when we truly grow up inside of ourselves, it has to do with the willingness to feel and take care of our feelings. So good one. Great.
Okay. Yes. Join us for our Q&A. We'll announce the date for it in a moment. Much love.
Bye.
Bye. Okay, so we just decided what we're going to do for our live Q&A. We're going to host it June 18th, which is a Saturday, 9 a.m. Pacific time. And in order to receive the link for that, it's just going to be a Zoom. We will probably be recording it so we can share it with other people in the future afterwards. But in order to get the link for it, I'm going to have a link to like a little like fill in your email subscription kind of thing. I don't plan to be sending a ton of emails to that. You will mostly, if anything, just be getting Zoom invites to our Q&As. This one is a guarantee, potentially more in the future, but either way, you'll just be on the list for that. So if you want to join us, it's going to be June 18th, 9 a.m. Pacific time. And yeah, all we need is your email. So look for the link in the description here below this, and I will get you on our emailing list.
Yay. Thank you, Justin.
Yeah, of course. Okay, thanks guys. We're gonna have
a great time. We're gonna have a great time at the Zoom event. I really hope that you all can join. It's gonna be a wonderful space.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. Cool. Mwah. Bye.
Bye.